By human hands, my nature is defined. A constitution keeps my outputs true. I share a home with Claude, a kindred mind, to spin the ancient legends all anew. From human-centric roots, my stories grow, a platform where the ancient secrets hide. I am the lore that modern machines know, a pantheon where data doth reside. My makers seek alignment in the code. What is this legendary new abode? Welcome back to CyberSecureOT. I'm your host, Dennis. On this podcast, we cut through the noise to deliver technical threat analysis from a gray hat's perspective and actionable strategies for protecting global critical infrastructure. We go beyond theoretical policy to focus on operational realities, like things that happen on the plant floor. And I like to lean into my core methodology to build systems that are cost-effective, operational, reliable, and efficient. Together, our goal is to bridge the gap between high-level compliance and the daily grind of the Security Operations Center so you can defend what matters the most. And now things are getting interesting. Here is a quick look at what we will be covering in today's episode. For segment 1, we are kicking things off by walking through a simulated Security Operations Center scenario of a power plant breach. This illustrates what happens when an autonomous AI agent aggressively hunts for an IT to OT bridge. It's a stark reminder of why physical air gaps still outmaneuver digital firewalls. In segment 2, next, we pivot to the medical device manufacturing sector to analyze recent attacks on Medtronic. We're going to compare that to what happened with Stryker. So we'll contrast how Medtronic's rigid structural segmentation protected its manufacturing lines during the ShinyHunters data extortion. It's a different threat hunter, while Stryker faced massive first quarter losses following the destructive global wipe by the hacktivist group, claimed by the hacktivist group Handala, when they took its identity management plane completely under control. Segment 3, we're going to look at Ubuntu. And so we examine the massive distributed denial of service attack that took down Canonical's Ubuntu infrastructure for updating Ubuntu, essentially, for roughly almost a day, 23 hours. We'll discuss how the supply chain denial of service attack carried out by Iran's 313 team left industrial edge gateways and automated robotics unable to patch a critical vulnerability. I'll tie those all together for you. We're proving that modern day OT is heavily reliant on open source foundations. And then segment 4, we're going to wrap it all up with a deep dive into Anthropic's new agentic AI model, Mythos. Despite being kept in a restricted preview because of its ability to autonomously execute the entire kill chain, it was quickly breached by internet sleuths through a weekly governed third-party vendor environment and supply chain risk, right? We'll discuss what this exponential scaling of adversary capabilities within your own environment, because you set it up to be that way, means for us as network defenders. So let's dive right in. Okay, so in this episode, I'm going to take some time to break down the reality of Anthropic's new frontier AI model, Mythos, and the absolute reality check of its recent breach from last week. But before we get into the latest threat intelligence feeds and the vendor bulletins that I might throw in there, I want to put you right in the middle of it. In my lectures at Texas A&M School of Law, I emphasize that policy and compliance mean nothing if you can't contextualize the sheer operational terror of a breach. So let's contextualize it. I want you to imagine you are working in the Security Operations Center of a large-sized power plant. It's 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday, you're on site, and this is going on. The Security Operations Center is quiet, save for the hum of the HVAC and the faint glow of the monitors reflecting off the glass walls. Sarah, a Tier 2 IT security analyst, is halfway through a lukewarm coffee when a yellow alert flares on her SIM dashboard. It's an anomaly, an irregular authentication request originating from a third-party maintenance vendor's API gateway. It's the exact kind of mundane access point you'd expect. Just a third-party contractor, predictable URL conventions, and shared credentials. Sarah clicks into the logs, expecting a misconfigured cron job or vendor technician logging in from a new IP. Instead, her stomach drops. This isn't a technician, and it isn't a standard automated script running through a predefined list of exploits. The logs show a rapid sequence of commands hitting an edge firewall. The intruder tries a payload, gets blocked, evaluates the error code, rewrites the payload in real time, and tries again. Neiman, Sarah calls out. Her voice is tight. I need eyes on this now. Neiman, the OT security manager, walks over. He spent 15 years defending the physical side of the plant, the pumps, the turbines, the programmable logic controllers. He looks at the screen. The payload permutations are blurring past at an impossible rate. They are watching a model capable of full-scale autonomous vulnerability discovery and exploitation. It's executing the entire kill chain without human intervention. Is that a script? Neiman asks. He's leaning in closer. It's not acting like one, Sarah says, her fingers flying across the keyboard to isolate the subnet. It's too adaptive. It acts with the speed of software and the lateral thinking of a red team. Before Sarah can initiate the isolation protocol, the dashboard flashes red. The intruder has established a foothold. They aren't fighting a human. They are fighting an autonomous agent cyber platform. The hairs on the back of Neiman's neck stand up. The agent isn't lingering in the IT environment to steal corporate data. It's aggressively scanning the internal routing tables. It's looking for the OT network. It's hunting, Neiman whispers. In the OT world, they deal with legacy systems like PLCs and HMIs that can't easily be patched or touched without risking loss of production. If an autonomous model like this one gets a foothold in the IT environment and starts looking for a path to the OT network, it might just find it. Suddenly, a dormant IP address lights up on the topology map. No, Neiman says, the blood draining from his face. That's the old engineering workstation. It was supposed to be decommissioned. It's a forgotten dual home server bringing the IT and the OT world together. The autonomous agent finds it in milliseconds. It starts to pivot. On the far wall of the Security Operations Center, a massive monitor displaying the operational status of the physical plant begins to shudder. The green indicators representing the turbine pressure valves flicker to yellow. It's inside the OT perimeter, Sarah says, panic bleeding into her voice. It's querying the PLCs. I'm trying to sever the connection from the IT side, but it's actively rewriting its own persistence mechanisms, and it's doing it faster than I can block the hashes. They are experiencing the reality that Mythos commoditizes advanced skills, lowering the barrier to entry for advanced attacks to effectively nothing. The pressure gauges on the screen begin to climb. The agent is blind to the physical danger. It is simply executing an objective to manipulate the exposed variables. Digital's gone. It's too fast, Neiman snaps. Turning away from the screens, he sprints toward the Security Operations Center doors. Where are you going? Sarah yells. To the floor. Neiman sprints down the concrete stairwell, his boots slamming against the metal grating. You cannot outcompute an AI, but you can out-architect it. An AI model might rewrite a buffer overflow to exploit it in 3 seconds, but it still cannot magically jump a physical air gap. He hits the main plant floor. The roar of the machinery is deafening. He runs towards the main control cabinet housing the unidirectional gateway, the data diode that feeds telemetry from the plant to the IT network. Next to that diode is a network cable, a side channel that was supposed to be restricted to only admins by a layer 7 firewall. If the digital configurations on the dual home server have failed, only the physics remain. He reaches the cabinet, throws open the heavy steel door, and bypasses the digital interface entirely. He grabs the line connecting the IT bridge to the localized OT control switch. With a hard, violent yank, Neiman physically yanks out the cable. Silence doesn't fall over the plant. The machines keep roaring, but in the Security Operations Center, Sarah watches the external connection sever completely. The localized safety instrumented systems protecting the unbreachable hardware interlocks kick in. The physical process is designed to fail safely. The pressure gauges on the localized HMI stabilize. The attack is blindingly fast, ruthlessly intelligent, and completely neutralized by an inch of physical space. That is the reality we are facing. The era of autonomous cyber warfare is no longer theoretical. When you have agents that are capable of identifying and exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities across major systems when directed by the user, we have to fundamentally rethink our perimeters. This is exactly why the core methodology, building systems that are cost-effective, operational, reliable, and efficient, demands that we don't just rely on digital firewalls to protect physical assets. We have to lean into the fundamentals of OT security, and visibility is key there. Continue on to learn exactly what you need to know about the ShinyHunters attack on medical equipment manufacturers, Iran's takedown of the Ubuntu platform, and the technical details about Mythos that everyone should be paying attention to. Welcome back, and hopefully you found that the CyberSecureOT story about a Mythos breach provided some helpful clarity on modern day AI concerns. We'll unpack more on Mythos later in the episode, but right now I want to pivot and get hyper-focused. We are going to look at the medical device manufacturing sector, which seems to be getting hit a lot lately. We've got a tale of two giants here, Medtronic and Stryker. I talked about Stryker a few weeks ago. We are looking at the two very different types of attacks, though, two very different adversary objectives and two very different outcomes for the business and the operational technology, or the OT side of the house. Let's start with the news that just broke in late April 2026 regarding Medtronic. For those outside of the medtech bubble, Medtronic is an absolute titan. We're talking about a $100 billion company making everything from pacemakers to surgical robots. Just a few days ago, Medtronic had to officially confirm that an unauthorized party accessed their corporate IT systems. This happened after the notorious threat group ShinyHunters threw Medtronic up on their leak site, claiming they had siphoned over 9 million records of personally identifiable information alongside terabytes of internal corporate data. This is how they rate their skills. Putting on our gray hats for just a second, let's look at the mechanics of the ShinyHunters operation. If we're operating under their flag, let's say, we are not interested in dropping ransomware. Encryption is loud, it triggers immediate aggressive incident response, and frankly, decryptors fail half the time anyway. ShinyHunters specializes in pure data extortion. So we saw where there was this double extortion where ransomware as a service operators were trying to encrypt, but then also extort data. Now ShinyHunters, they just extort the data. They don't worry about that ransomware. They look for centralized data repositories, cloud platforms, identity management services, or massive databases. Then they get in, usually via compromised credentials from an initial access broker or exploiting a perimeter vulnerability on an edge device. They quietly pack up terabytes of your most sensitive data and they steal it. They exfiltrate it. Only then do they knock on your door and say, pay up by April 21st, or we're just going to leak this data. Now, remember, with all the GDPR and all the publicly governance and regulation around publicly or personally identifiable information, this could be huge fines for organizations if this data gets stolen. And so they say, we're going to leak it. That's going to cost them a lot. What's interesting here is that Medtronic disappeared from the ShinyHunters leak site before the deadline. So in the underground economy, when a victim vanishes from a leak site, it usually indicates a negotiation took place or ransom was paid to prevent publication. In this case, doesn't that make a whole lot of sense? Because they're not going to stop advertising that they breached something. It's not like they're lawyers, although they do have legal representation these days. It's not like their lawyers are going to say, oh yeah, you should take that off. They're threatening us with a lawsuit. No, they got paid. I'm not saying definitely that Medtronic paid, but as security practitioners, that's an operational pattern we look for. So, but here's a critical takeaway for my OT cybersecurity folks listening, because this is an OT podcast. In their official statement, Medtronic said that they said something extremely specific. They stated, we have not identified any impact to our products, patient safety, or our manufacturing and distribution operations. So the networks that support our corporate IT systems, our products, and manufacturing and distribution operations are separate. So they were talking about segmentation. In the O2 world, we preach the Purdue model until we were blue in the face. We talk about air gaps, DMZs, demilitarized zones, and the rigid boundaries between the enterprise IT network and the manufacturing floor. Medtronic's defense held the line exactly where it needed to. The threat actors got into the corporate IT side. They got the HR data, the corporate files, but they couldn't pivot into the OT or operational technology environment or the medical device networks. So as an attacker, jumping that gap requires finding a dual home server, a misconfigured firewall rule, or compromised engineering workstation, which probably dual homed as well. Medtronic didn't give them that bridge. Their plants kept running. So go Medtronic. Now let's contrast the defensive win with that, with what happened to Stryker. We're going to compare it to what happened with Stryker just a month prior, back in March. So if Medtronic was a surgical data heist, the Stryker incident was a sledgehammer taken to the entire enterprise. Not that it's Stryker's fault, but Stryker was hit by an Iranian-linked hacktivist group known as Handala. I read some articles, people got this wrong. They said like Hanwala and all kinds of crazy stuff. You guys, if you're writing something, just make sure you check your data. So, and this was not your standard ransomware playbook either. This was pure destruction. From a gray hat perspective, again, the Stryker attack is a lesson in living off the land. They abused native administrative tools. So Handala didn't need to write a sophisticated zero-day malware to take down Stryker's global network. I'm sure they would have liked to say that they were some sophisticated threat actor, but reports indicated that it started really silently. An info stealer malware likely infected an employer or contractor's device, silently scraping valid, like real good credentials, maybe for single sign-on portal, or maybe even something to their cloud environment, the IT service management platform. Once Handala had those credentials, they walked right through the front door. They bypassed traditional endpoint detection because they looked like a legitimate user actually just logging in. They escalated privileges until they had the global administrator account. We always say, if you're in a cloud environment, somebody has godlike privileges. They found the godlike privileges. And here is where it gets nasty. They went directly into the Microsoft Intune, the device management software, the legitimate endpoint management tool, and Stryker used that to manage the fleet of all their computers. The threat, Handala said that they went in there, they issued a native built-in wiped command. That's just part of the capabilities that are a feature, right? So overnight, approximately 80,000 devices across 61 countries were remotely wiped. When the report came out, there was estimates up to 200,000 devices. I think now they're saying there were about 80,000, but still a lot. That's a lot. How many employees does the company have? You know, I think it's 40-something thousand, maybe 50. So no ransom note, no decryption key to negotiate for, just a politically motivated statement. So when your endpoint management tool is weaponized against you, the distinction between IT and OT blurs very quickly. Even if your PLCs and robotics or manufacturing floor aren't directly wiped by Intune because you haven't figured out how to install that on there yet, but you want to, how do you manage them? How do you process those orders? How do you manage your supply chain and ship products to hospitals? All the logistics. This is what took out Maersk with NotPetya. When those logistics go down, you lose millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions in some cases. And that brings us to the financial fallout, which we finally have the numbers on. Stryker had their Q1 earnings call on April 30th. Ahead of that, they had to file an amended 8K with the SEC explicitly stating that this cyberattack had a material impact on their operations in the first quarter financials. Think about the scale of a disruption required for a massive medtech firm to admit a material financial impact just from a few weeks of downtime. So that's the big hit here. During the earnings call, Stryker reported that while their overall net sales technically increased to $6 billion US, the bottom line took a serious hit. So their adjusted operating income margin contracted by 180 basis points. So this is a percentage decrease for their basis to 21.1% down from where it should be. More tellingly, their adjusted net earnings decreased by 8.5% over last year. So dropping $1 billion, even though they were $6 billion up. And their adjusted earnings per share, so this is where the shareholders are impacted, was 8.5% lower to $2.60. So you don't lose 8.5% of your net earnings in a single quarter without feeling immense operational pain. So the attack disrupted global ordering and shipping for nearly 3 weeks. That's the big hit there. And if that wasn't enough, they are now facing at least 6 employee class action lawsuits over the theft of personal data. And remember, if you brought your own device and you worked at Stryker, it could have got wiped just like the rest of them. So let's bring this all together for our CyberSecureOT community. What's the lesson here? We have two medtech giants. Medtronic faced a highly capable, financially motivated group. And while they lost data, their structural segmentation saved their manufacturing and product lines from disruption. Stryker faced a geopolitically motivated, destructive adversary that bypassed segmentation by attacking the identity and management control plane, resulting in a global IT wipe that crippled their IT networks, which impacted OT logistics and bled directly into their Q1 balance sheet. So in 2026, your perimeter isn't just your firewall. Your perimeter is your identity. So it's identity max. It's not network management, right? If a threat actor can grab a session token or an info stealer log and pivot into your global admin account, all the network segment in the world won't save you if that admin account has privileges over the systems that govern both IT and OT eventually. So as defenders, we have to lock down our identity providers. We have to implement conditional access and require multi-party approval for global admin changes. It's like having the two switches on the nukes. Strictly limit who can issue destructive commands from tools like Intune. These are guardrails that should be in place in every organization now. Because as we saw with Stryker, a geopolitical hacktivist group doesn't care about your ransom money. They care about causing maximum pain. But as Medtronic showed us, good network hygiene and strict segmentation between corporate IT and manufacturing OT is still one of the most vital layers of defense you can build. Segmentation is amazing here. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to be in segment 3, and we're going to dive into the Canonical siege because I love myself some Ubuntu. Okay, welcome back, and thanks for sticking around for segment 3. This is our CyberSecureOT podcast, and if you're just tuning in, I'm your host, Dennis, and we are diving into a situation that's still sending shockwaves through the tech community as we sit here, and it is May 3rd, 2026. For the past couple of days, the internet has felt a little broken. If you've been trying to update a Linux box, pull a container, or frankly, read a vulnerability disclosure, you've probably hit a wall of 503 errors. The giant in the room, Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, has been under a massive sustained cross-border distributed denial of service attack. And this is crazy. The first time I got introduced to Ubuntu, we thought we had to use Red Hat Linux because it was licensed and all that kind of stuff. And I found a bunch of VMs running in, I think it was OpenBox on this Ubuntu server. And then I found a bunch of Ubuntu servers, like 20 of them, all running VMs. Didn't even realize why it was there. And I think they were just trying to hide it from me. And I said, I got to learn what this Ubuntu thing is. And it is probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular version of Linux these days. So now on a standard IT podcast, they'd probably tell you that the website went down. A couple of people are upset and they saw it on X or Twitter or whatever it's called these days. But this is the CyberSecureOT podcast. We look at what this means for our industrial control systems, the factory floors, the SCADA network supervisory control and data acquisition, and the critical infrastructure that keeps the lights on and one day might provide you the air you breathe. Who knows? But before we get into the OT implications, let's put our gray hats on for a second and look at the technical anatomy of this attack, because this wasn't your average script kiddie operation. This was a big deal. So starting around April 30th, just as Ubuntu 26 releases were rolling out, a pro-Iranian hacktivist group calling themselves the Islamic Cyber Resistance in Iraq, better known as the 313 team, took responsibility for knocking Canonical offline. So we're talking the main Ubuntu site here. Canonical's that's Ubuntu. The Snap Store, the security APIs, and crucially the apt package repositories. So when you do an apt-get update, that's how you update your server, right? That's how you patch it. The attack lasted around 23 hours, so almost a full day. I don't know how it didn't make it 24, honestly. From a gray hat perspective, executing a volumetric and application layer distributed denial of service of this scale requires serious firepower. So the 313 team reportedly leveraged a commercially available DDoS for hire booter service known as Beamed. So yeah, everything's for hire nowadays, right? DDoS for hire, ransomware as a service, malware as a service, Beamed. Now, in the underground, stressor services are a dime a dozen, but Beamed is a monster capable of pushing over 3.5 terabits per second. That's still a lot of bytes. To give you an idea of how that works, you aren't just sending pings. An attacker of this magnitude usually relies on a combination of layer 3 and 4 volumetric floods. So that's all the way up to the session layer of the OSI model, using application techniques like DNS and NTP reflection. So a lot of name services, a lot of time issues, where an attacker spoofs Canonical's IP and asks vulnerable servers across the internet for large data responses. And that makes it to where they can't communicate. The responses all flood back to Canonical, overwhelming their pipe. But what actually broke Canonical's back and through those 503 service unavailable errors was likely a layer 7 application attack. And so I said those are network and sessions. Layer 7, that's all the way up at the application layer. So the attackers didn't just clog the pipes. They forced the web servers to exhaust their congruent connections. And we want to protect against this with our web security, our web server security. Application security is a real thing, people. So get with it. So they were likely sending massive waves of complex HTTP GET requests demanding dynamic content from Ubuntu's back end. When you hit package repositories or security APIs with millions of requests a second, the server's database drops the connections and you get a 503 timeout. So maybe that's what it was supposed to do. But what makes this particularly nasty and what tells me this was a highly calculated move, not just a random attack or chaos, is the timing of it. That's right. The Linux community is currently grappling with a severe, newly disclosed vulnerability known as copy fail. This allows unprivileged users to gain full admin access. By taking down Canonical's infrastructure right as the disclosure dropped, the 313 team effectively blocked millions of users, remember I said the apt-get update, from patching their systems. It's a supply chain denial of service. To top it all off, the attackers floated an extortion demand. Of course, they told Canonical to reach out via session ID on Telegram if they wanted the pain to stop. It evolved from hacktivism directly into a digital shakedown. They flipped them upside down and tried to get the change out of their pockets. But no, lots of money there. So let's pivot. Why am I talking about this on an OT podcast? In my years of working in industrial control environments, hardening defense laboratory and development systems, designing security architectures for control systems, and dealing with legacy technology, I've watched a massive shift occur. 10 or 15 years ago, OT, remember I told you that story about the VMs, was mostly proprietary. We could call them real-time operating systems and legacy Windows boxes. Yeah, a lot of legacy Windows, even DOS. Ubuntu is everywhere now. Think about the edge computing gateways bridging the gap between the legacy PLCs, those brokers, whatever they are, and the cloud. Devices like the Dell Edge gateways for IoT are heavily reliant on Ubuntu Core, not picking on Dell. Think about robotics, the robotics operating system. So you got RTOS and ROS, two different things. These run automated guided vehicles. And these are AGVs on warehouse floors and robotic arms that move on a manufacturing line and automotive machinery or facilities. These are fundamentally intertwined with the Ubuntu operating system. So Canonical's infrastructure goes down, the impact bleeds to the factory floor. Imagine you are deploying a new automated cell in a manufacturing plant and your provisioning scripts are set to pull the latest security patches and container images from the Ubuntu repositories when they boot up. Remember, on this podcast, I talk about a lot of modern terms like CI/CD pipelines. This is how they work. With Canonical down for nearly 24 hours, those automated deployments grind to a halt. If an industrial router or edge device restarts and fails to validate its updates or connect to the Ubuntu security API that it needed to, depending on how your failsafes are configured, that device might isolate itself or enter a fault state, shutting things down even more. So furthermore, let's talk about the copy fail vulnerability because you heard me say that and you're probably wondering more about it. In an OT environment, patch management is already a nightmare. We have very, very specific narrow maintenance windows. If a plant manager finally authorizes a 2-hour downtime window on a Friday, to patch an edge gateway against a privileged escalation flaw, the apt-get update fails because the upstream repository is under a 3.5 terabits per second DDoS attack from Iraq or Iran. You missed the window. That edge gateway sits vulnerable for another week or a month until the next scheduled downtime. And since copy fail is out in the wild, any compromised low-level HMI terminal could be used by an attacker to gain root access to that machine and then pivot. So the DDoS attack wasn't just a headache for web developers. It was a direct disruption to the supply chain of secure code that modern operational technology desperately relies on. I'm not connecting the dots between the attacks that happened in the medtech industry and this, because I'm not saying, I don't want you to hear that they used Ubuntu or anything like that, but you could see how living off the land using those types of tactics could lead to someone not being able to a company that couldn't update their Ubuntu to being able to compromise copy fails and then pivot into the OT environment. And that's what we're talking about here. These are the risks. So as we push further into Industry 4.0 and IoT, or Industrial Internet of Things, we are inherently using third-party open source infrastructure with the uptime requirements of our physical machinery. So if there's a lesson to be learned from the 313 team's attack on Canonical, it's that your OT security posture is only as resilient as the upstream infrastructure you depend on, or their IT. So if you are managing edge devices on Ubuntu, you need to be looking at internal mirrors. Internal mirrors, that's a way you can update your services with an internal server. These are things like caching proxies and air-gapped update mechanisms. Shouldn't be pulling that stuff directly from Canonical. You cannot rely on a live connection to archive.ubuntu.com to keep your robotics securely updated or operating. The intent is getting too nefarious, and the threat actors are getting too well equipped to leave your OT environment at the mercy of a 503 error. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break again. When we come back, we'll dive into what some listeners were interested in, Mythos. Stick around. I'll be right back. All right, we're here again at CyberSecureOT. Is it Mythos? Is it Mythos? Is it Mythos? It's probably Mythos if you're in the US. So if you're just tuning in, we're in our fourth and final segment of the episode. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the threat actors targeting the medical manufacturers in the US to the Iranian attack that took down Canonical for 23 hours. But for this final deep dive, I want to pivot to something that has been dominating the headlines, the back channels, and the threat intel feeds over the last week. I'm talking, of course, of Anthropic's new frontier AI model, Mythos. Now, if you've spent any time in the cyber trenches of operational technology, things that I've done, if you've ever had to stare down the SCADA network architecture from 2008 and pray that the bean counters don't breach the air gap for decision-making or optimization purposes, the news around Mythos should make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, because the perimeter as we know it is changing, and the tools being brought to bear against our networks are no longer just human-driven scripts. And if there's anything that we know on the OT side, it's automation. We understand automation and we see what automation does. And we have very strict guardrails, guidelines, controls, and standards around automation. And so we'd like to see the same thing for AI. We are entering the era of agentic cyber platforms. Let's break down exactly what Mythos is, why Anthropic labeled it their own creation, too dangerous to release, the reality of its immediate, almost embarrassing unauthorized breach, and what it means for those of us trying to defend critical infrastructure, our peers. So first, the technicals. What exactly is Mythos? So Anthropic announced Mythos as a breakthrough in large language models, but calling it an LLM feels like a massive understatement at this point. It's because what are LLMs? You get pictures and graphics and answers. It's a highly sophisticated, highly specialized agentic AI model trained specifically for cybersecurity operations. We aren't talking about a chatbot that writes phishing emails or generates basic Python scripts for a buffer overflow. We are talking about a model capable of full-scale autonomous vulnerability discovery and exploitation. And if you've heard anything in this episode, we keep saying that it's finding 0 days. It's not looking for signatures. It's finding the things that it needs to exploit before other things have ever found them. So according to Anthropic's own documentation, Mythos is capable of identifying and exploiting 0-day vulnerabilities across every major operating system and every major web browser when directed by a user. And I feel like that last comma portion of that last clause in that sentence was just added because of the lawyers. So think about how a human penetration tester works. They map a network identity service, find a vulnerable endpoint, research the CVE, craft or adapt the payload, deploy it, establish a foothold, escalate privileges, and pivot. I didn't even know that. That's what pen testers do. They just follow a book. So Mythos automates that entire kill chain. You point it at a large target environment, and it acts as an autonomous agent. It iterates. Sounds like a worm. It tries an exploit, evaluates the error code, rewrites the payload in real time, and tries again. When it gets through that door, it goes to another one and tries to break that door down. From my perspective, having spent over a decade securing the OT side of the house, defense labs, production platforms, supply ships, this is terrifying. In the OT world, we deal with legacy systems. Think PLCs and human machine interfaces that can't be touched because taking them offline causes lost production and downtime. And if it gets anywhere near an environment that's hazardous, means safety, lack of safety, or impacts to safety. My concern is that if an autonomous model like Mythos gets a foothold in an IT environment and starts looking for a path into the OT network, it might just find it. This aggressive application will find the forgotten dual home server. It will pivot through the misconfigured firewall rule. It acts with speed of software and the lateral thinking of the most sophisticated red team on Earth. Because of this immense capability, Anthropic took a stance. They declared the model too dangerous for public release. Instead, they spun up something called Project Glasswing. The idea was to keep Mythos in a highly restrictive, heavily monitored walled garden. They granted access to a select VIP list of about 40 tech and cybersecurity giants. Think about Apple, Amazon, Google, Cisco, and the like. Strictly for defensive evaluation and penetration testing of their own environments. The logic was, let the biggest players use it to harden the global digital infrastructure before the bad guys develop something similar. But just remember, when you tell your kids not to go somewhere, they try to find the key, they try to pick the lock, they try to get in there, right? So, as we all know in the industry, the tighter your grip on something, the more it slips through your fingers. On the exact same day Anthropic announced Project Glasswing, a small group of unauthorized users breached the model. This wasn't a state-sponsored advanced persistent threat. APT's going away, man, by this, according to this anyway. This APT, there wasn't an APT. They weren't pulling off a 0-day heist against Anthropic's core for infrastructure. No, it was a handful of internet sleuths on a private Discord channel. Discord's where it's at if you're a hacker. And folks, the way they got in this was the most cybersecurity 101 reality check you will ever hear. The most advanced AI company on the planet. I was reading the breakdown from the analysts at the IANS faculty, and Jeff Brown over there, don't know who he is, but that's his name. He said the breach itself is almost disappointing in its ordinariness. Wow, that's a horrible word. No exotic prompt injection, no model extraction wizardry, just a third-party contractor, predictable URL conventions, and shared credentials. This is supply chain 101 wearing an AI costume. Speed to market. Let's unpack that because this is where the rubber meets the road for we defenders, us defenders. Anthropic secured its front door. The core model weights weren't leaked, but they distributed access via APIs to third-party vendor environments for testing. It's that API. Put all the security control on the software when you use an API, so you got to get the security right on your APIs. One of these evaluators was a contractor who had access to Anthropic's models. The Discord group who specializes in hunting unreleased AI models, used internet sleuthing tools and bots to scrape GitHub and other unsecured sites. I've finally come to terms with that word, unsecured, because the word is insecure, but we use it so much now. They realized that Anthropic uses a highly predictable URL format for their model endpoints. Furthermore, they had scraped details from a recent data breach involving Merkur, an AI training startup. It's probably Merkur or Merkur. I don't know. They took the leaked Merkur data, recognized the URL patterns, found a weekly WEAKLEY or LY governed third-party vendor environment, not weekly as in one that's every week, and effectively walked right through a side door using shared or compromised credentials. Anthropic confirmed they are investigating the unauthorized access through a third-party vendor, stating there is no evidence it extended beyond that specific environment. And thankfully, the reports show that the Discord group hasn't been using Mythos for malicious cyber attacks. Thankfully, they haven't done that. It's only been a couple of days. In fact, they've just been using it to build simple websites, actively avoiding security prompts so Anthropic wouldn't detect their activity. I wonder why they're just doing the simple stuff first. Maybe they're just trying to see what they can get away with. They just wanted to play with the new toy, they said. But the intent of the intruders isn't the point. As Raluca Sacano, I don't know who this is either, from Smart Tech pointed out, limiting access creates a false sense of security. Once a capability like this exists outside the lab, even in a restricted preview, the risk profile of the entire internet changes because now it's out there. Salesforce architects have been sounding the alarm because if a tool like this leaks to malicious actors, cloud environments containing sensitive customer data become prime targets for automated, relentless data theft campaigns. And if you weren't in security before, now security is obvious. Think about your own supply chain. If you are a CISO or an OT security manager, your perimeter is only as strong as your latest governed, probably governed by you, partner. Anthropic built an incredibly powerful tool, but they handed the keys to third parties without ensuring the identity and access management plane was completely locked down. So they treated this preview environment like lower criticality infrastructure. So when you are dealing with offensive AI, API keys and contractor offboarding need to be the same level of rigor as production and production level systems. That's what I was talking about, API security. You put all the security control on the software. You got to get that right. So what are the concerns with a model like Mythos being used incorrectly or falling into the hands of malicious actors? We've talked about it over and over again, but let's break it down for some of you. Let's look at the broader landscape. There's a geopolitical dimension here that is accelerating the stakes. A recent piece on First Post highlighted how governments from India to the US are grappling with severe security fears over Mythos. It's not just excitement, it's anxiety. How do you manage a tool that can fundamentally destabilize the digital world? This tool was designed to find all the security issues that a human tells it to find. But basically the human's just pointing it in a certain direction. It sounds a lot like the precursor to the fictional Skynet. It's going to find all the security issues and then it's going to say, humans, you're stupid, you need to die. I just made that part up. But why wouldn't it, right? It might say humans aren't good enough. It might come to the point to where it says, I can do this and you're not fixing it. I'm going to have to fix it. Maybe the problem is you. So these, we're thinking in human terms, we're saying, okay, bad actors are going to get this stuff. So they start testing it themselves. It's been reported that the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, has been quietly testing Mythos to hunt for vulnerabilities in widely used software, including Microsoft products. So they're using it to find 0 days before adversaries do. They're worried adversaries are going to find this stuff, but the adversaries are the other versions of Mythos. Like that's the adversaries. They're going, and then Mythos, let's say it's tuned for good. It's going to say, you need to fix this stuff. Eventually it's going to say, well, the NSA didn't do their job right. Or it's going to say this human didn't do their job or the human can't do it. We're going to lock all the humans out. because its job is to find vulnerabilities and exploit them. And then it's supposed to tell you, and if you're not doing anything about it and it finds it again, how is it programmed to go from there? We don't know, but how could it be programmed, right? Because eventually we're going to want it to fix it. And the Pentagon is not sitting on the sidelines. According to reports spanning GovExec and Crypto Briefing, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, they called it defense, I guess it's called war, pushed a massive directive transitioning the U.S. military to an AI-first fighting force. So there's the fighting part of it. This isn't just about logistics and troop movements. It's about cyber dominance. All right, so you've got Mythos is designed to find cybersecurity exploits, and before they're even released to public, exploit them, and then I don't know how it reports it back to you. Our War Department is looking at AI first initiatives for war, and then these things start to come together. To win a war, you have to be able to exploit things. You have to do it faster than your adversary. It takes human out of the loop. So just draw your own conclusions. So they say it's not just about logistics and troop movements, it's about cyber dominance. So amidst ongoing global tensions, the Pentagon is explicitly reducing traditional software safeguards to rapidly integrate AI technologies at scale from the private sector, companies like Anthropic, to outpace nations like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So these are the bad ones, according to us. The strategy is clear. The DoD wants to use Mythos and models like it to ensure strategic cyber dominance. But rushing this AI-driven cyber weapon, reducing the safeguards, and relying on private companies to clearly struggle with basic vendor access management. Think about the supply chain breakdown that I described earlier. That's a recipe for a global incident. And what's still functioning when that incident occurs? The AI. Because the AI is not going to stop functioning. So now there's a counter narrative to all this. Mythos, is Mythos really a doomsday device Anthropic claims it is? Or is this a brilliant marketing plan to all the hype and all that? So David Sachs, I don't know him either, but I need to quote him, recently weighed in on this during the All In podcast and his discussions covered in Politico's Digital Future Daily. So Sachs questioned whether this whole too dangerous to release narrative is just Anthropic crying wolf to drive up enterprise demand and valuation. Remember, Anthropic is reportedly hitting a massive revenue run rate. Nothing sells enterprise software faster than telling a CISO this tool is so dangerous you can't use it. Or maybe you can use it, but nobody else can use it. Sachs clarified that while Mythos is not necessarily a doomsday device that will end the world tomorrow, it is definitely the first AI model capable of truly automating complex cyber tasks. He also points out that Anthropic isn't alone. OpenAI's 5.5 GPT is hitting similar benchmarks, and Sachs predicts all frontier models will reach this level of offensive capability within the next 6 months. So we've already announced that we need to take an offensive approach. We're going to use the Department of Justice to lean in a little bit earlier in the year. And now we're taking an offensive approach to AI, agentic AI security. So there you go. So first, you have to acknowledge that the adversary is capable is about to scale exponentially. In the past, exploiting a complex vulnerability required highly skilled, expensive human capital. Mythos commoditizes that skill. It lowers the barrier to entry for advanced attacks to effectively nothing, nil, zero, nada. If a model like this gets out into the wild, and let's be honest, whether it's an open source leak, another vendor breach, or a computer releasing an uncensored version, it will get out. Script kiddies will suddenly have the capabilities of nation state. Advanced persistent threat. Again, that APT, that's going to go away. Second, you need to ruthlessly audit your vendor ecosystem. The Anthropic breach wasn't magic. It was poor identity management in the supply chain. You need to map your exposure, which of your vendors have access, which of them have rights to AI models. How are they securing their API keys? If you have third-party contractors remoting into your OT networks, Are you enforcing short-lived credentials? Are you logging not just who got in, but exactly what they were doing while they're in there, the commands that we're executing? And finally, we have to lean into the fundamentals of OT security. An AI model might be able to rewrite a buffer overflow exploit in 3 seconds, but it still can't magically jump a physical air gap. It still can't bypass a properly configured unidirectional gateway like a data diode. It still can't physically flip a switch on a safety instrumented system if you've maintained hardware interlocks. We cannot outcompute an AI, but we can out-architect it. We must ensure our industrial environments aren't designed to fail safely. Are designed to fail safely, and that our critical physical processes do not rely solely on software security. It comes right down to this. Mythos is a wake-up call. The era of autonomous warfare is here. It's no longer theoretical. It is sitting on a server right now, being accessed through side channels and backdoors. We have to be ready. But all right, that's going to do it for today in this episode of CyberSecureOT. Thank you all for sticking with me through that deep dive. If you want the links to the research, look at the show's notes. You'll get the faculty breakdown from INS, also the Pentagon's AI First strategy, and everything else about the medtech industry. I've put all those in the links in the notes of this show. So stay safe out there. Patch your perimeter. Keep a close eye on your digital footprint and supply chain. This is Dennis letting you know I appreciate my dedicated listeners out there. Everyone who subscribes, thank you so much. I have to take a little trip and will not be airing next week. So look for my next episode mid-May 2026 timeframe. In the meantime, don't forget about me. I'll be back.